English language learning, the art of using ought to in simple future tense. Hello, English language enthusiasts. Welcome to today's learning session. Today, we're going to dive deep into a very interesting topic: the usage of ought to in the simple future tense. This topic falls under our wider discussion of simple future tense with modals. Are you ready to decode the intricacies of ought to? Let's get started. Before we delve into how to use ought to in the simple future tense, let's quickly understand what ought to means. The phrase ought to is a type of modal verb that we use to indicate a strong probability, a logical conclusion, or an advice or suggestion. An example would be, "You ought to study for your test tomorrow." This sentence uses ought to provide advice or a suggestion. Moving on to our main focus, using ought to in the simple future tense. When we talk about the future, ought to shows what is expected or believed likely to happen. Let's look at a few examples. 1. The meeting ought to finish by 3 p.m. This sentence shows an expectation about a future event. 2. It ought to rain tomorrow. This sentence represents a belief or prediction about a future event. Now, how about expressing a negative advice or suggestion? We can do this by using ought not to or oughtn't to. For example, "You ought not to ignore your health." This sentence gives advice against doing something in the future. As for asking questions, we use ought to at the start of a sentence. For example, "Ought we to leave a tip?" This question asks about what is expected or proper to do in a future situation. A common confusion occurs between ought to and should. Both can be used to give advice or talk about duty or obligation, but should is much more common, especially in American English. Remember, ought to tends to be used in more formal settings and often indicates a stronger sense of obligation or necessity than should. That's a wrap on our discussion on using ought to in the simple future tense. The more you practice using this modal verb, the more natural it will feel. Remember to use ought to when you want to express advice, predictions, or expectations about the future. As always, practice makes perfect. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in our next English language learning video.